has replaced the F-22 11 McCain Amendment. And my argument is that the majority leader has put in legislation which is not relevant to the pending legislation, which is the Department of Defense authorization bill. I am perfectly willing for the hate crimes bill to come up under the regular order. And why it should be put on the defense authorization bill, which will then not allow adequate debate and discussion amendments, not to mention the fact that it hasn't gone through the Committee of Jurisdiction, frankly, I do not think is appropriate way of using the defense authorization bill. In fact, I think it's highly inappropriate. So therefore, why don't we do this? I asked my friend from Illinois. Agree that as soon as the defense authorization bill is complete, we take up the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act under the regular order and do business the way the Senate should do business. So therefore, Mr. President, I now ask unanimous consent that the pending amendment be immediately withdrawn, that no amendments on the topic of hate crimes be in order to the pending legislation. Further, I ask that when the Senate completes action on the Department of Defense authorization bill, that it be in order for the Senate to proceed to S-909, the Matthew Shepard Hate Crimes Prevention Act, under the regular order. Now,
is there an objection?
Reserving the right to object. Mr. President, I would say that the senator from Arizona knows that on 16 different occasions this year, Republican senators have offered non-relevant amendments to pending legislation. The senator has done that himself. I've done it myself. It is not unusual or beyond the custom and rules of the Senate, and I believe Senator Reid has the right to do it on this critically important legislation, which we can move to with dispatch. And based on that, I do object.
So,
objection is heard.
So, Mr. President, here's the facts. The facts is that the majority leader, whose job is to move legislation through the Senate, is now blocking progress of defense authorization, that progress through the Senate, by proposing an unneeded, irrelevant amendment, which is a large piece of legislation, which is highly controversial. The Senate majority leader will come to the floor and he will file cloture, and then after some hours, there with no amendments, because he'll probably fill up the tree, the Senate will pass a highly controversial, highly explosive piece of legislation to be attached to the authorization for the defense of the security of this nation. That's wrong. And why? I won't put it this way. It is unanswerable that we don't just take up the hate crimes bill in the regular order and allow the Senate debate and discussion. That's how the Senate's supposed to work, not put a major piece of legislation. I would also point out to my friend from Illinois something he knows, that it's one thing for someone who sits back there to propose an amendment to pending legislation because they feel that's the only way that they can get their argument heard. The majority leader of the United States Senate has the authority to move whatever legislation he wants. And the majority leader of the United States Senate should move the hate crimes bill if he wants it considered, rather than give it priority over the legislation that accounts for the national security of this country and the men and women who serve in it. So I'm sure that there will be all kinds of comments about the Republicans blocking a vote, blocking this, blocking that. Why don't we take up legislation in the regular order that it could? Hate crimes has been opposed by the United States Commission on Civil Rights. This is a very, very controversial issue. And we're not going to, by putting it on the DOD bill, we're not going to have the adequate debate, discussion, and amendment that an issue like this deserves. There's passion on both sides of the aisle. So it's obvious that whether it's the intention or not, what's happening here is the whole process of debate amendment will be short-circuited, because we on this side of the aisle are more than willing to take up the legislation as a separate piece of legislation, debate, amend, and discuss it, and let the American people decide. Instead, the men and women in the military right now today are being shortchanged by putting an irrelevant legislation that's highly controversial and highly complex on a bill designed to defend this country and the men and women who serve it.
For a question?
Actually, I'll be glad to yield, but if you want to have a colloquy, I'd go ahead.
I want to make sure Senator Boxer has her chance. If I could make 2 points in the nature of a question to the Senator from Arizona. First, Senator Reid offered this amendment on behalf of Senator Leahy, Chairman of the Senate Judiciary Committee, now presiding over the Sotomayor hearings. I know he supports it, and I support it as well, the hate crimes legislation, but I want to make that for a matter of record.
Could I respond to that? Yep. It's one thing to have the chairman of the committee support it. It's another thing to have the legislation go through the committee with the proper debate and discussion and amendments. But go ahead.
Second point I would like to make to the senator from Arizona is that when we asked for leave or unanimous consent from the Republican side to move to the hate crimes legislation, there was objection. So it isn't as if we haven't tried to go through regular order. This seems to be the only path we can use to bring this matter to a conclusion, and it can be done, I think, in a responsible way quickly. It doesn't have to drag out over a matter of days. The senator knows that. And if we can get agreement on both sides to go to a reasonable time for debate and vote on the bill, I think that would meet the needs that you've suggested to get back on the substance of the defense authorization bill.
In deference to the senator from California, I'll make my answer brief, just to say that I just don't think, as I said, my previous argument that it does not belong on a defense authorization bill, particularly so moved by the majority leader of the Senate. But Mr. President, the senator from California is waiting, and I yield the floor.
Mr. President, if the senator from California would allow me to make unanimous consent request before she speaks. Mr. President, I ask unanimous consent that at 12 noon on Thursday, July 16th, the Senate proceed to vote on the motion to invoke cloture on the Leahy Amendment number 1511, with time until then equally divided and controlled between the leaders or their designees, that if a closure is invoked on Amendment 1511, then all post-closure time be yielded back and Amendment number 1539 be agreed to, that Amendment number 1511 as amended be agreed to, and the motion to reconsider be laid upon the table, that upon disposition of the Hate Crimes Amendment, Senator Levin be recognized to offer the Levin-McCain Amendment, and that the time until 5 p.m. Thursday, July 16th be for debate with respect to the amendment, with all time equally divided and controlled between Senators Levin and Chambliss or their designees, that at 5 p.m. Thursday, July 16th, the Senate proceed to vote in relation to the amendment with no intervening amendment in order during the pendency of the F-22 amendment. Further, that the mandatory quorum be waived with respect to Rule 22, and the purpose of this unanimous consent is to achieve just what the senator from Arizona asked for. A timely consideration of both amendments will be back on the bill on his amendment, and I ask unanimous consent that we accept this schedule and move forward.
Reserving the right to object.
Is there an objection, Senator from Arizona?
Reserving the right to object, and I will object. I'm not asking that there be a time agreement on hate crimes. I'm asking that the hate crimes bill be brought up as a standing bill. The senator has 60 votes. The senator could bring it up on whether this side of the aisle objects or not as a freestanding piece of legislation. I don't object to it being made part of the legislation I object to it being considered on the Department of Defense authorization bill. It has no place for it. It shouldn't be there. The longer we wait, the longer the delay is between providing the men and women of the military the tools that they need. So I do object, and we should take this up, and I'm sorry that my unanimous consent agreement was not agreed to, that we would take it up as a freestanding bill after the consideration of the Department of Defense bill. And I yield the floor, and I thank the senator from California for her courtesy.
Objection is heard.
Mr. President.
The senator from California.
Mr. President, I thank